Welcome to the deep dive.
Oh.
You know, if you spend like any time at all scrolling through social media, you've probably seen those cross-cultural romances unfolding across these massive distances.
Oh, absolutely. They're everywhere right now.
Right. And the narrative you get is almost always wrapped up in this very specific type of, well, I guess you'd call it fairy tale glitter.
Yeah, total romanticization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see the flight getting booked, the visas getting approved, the marriage license signed, and everyone in the comments is celebrating what looks like this massive, unquestionable life upgrade.
But it's never actually that simple, is it?
No, not at all. And today we are taking a completely different approach. We are tuning off the filters.
I love that. So what are we getting into today?
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore some really intense excerpts from a profoundly eye-opening source called The Sovereign Fortress.
Okay, The Sovereign Fortress. That sounds intense.
It is. We are going to extract its radical, highly controversial, and honestly just incredibly detailed legal blueprint for securing cross-cultural marriages.
Which is so necessary because people really underestimate what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Because the reality is, the moment a Filipina packs her entire life into, like, 2 suitcases, says goodbye to her family, and boards an international flight to live with her Western husband, she is not just moving her address.
Right. It is a vastly more complex operation than just a change of scenery.
Much heavier. I mean, she is fundamentally dismantling her established identity, her local networks, and her entire safety net.
Yeah, the source describes it as completely tearing down her life's architecture.
Exactly. She's basically taking that architecture and trying to rebuild it entirely on a foreign, high-gravity planet where she doesn't even know the rules of physics yet.
It is an act of immense trust.
Immense trust, but it's also an enterprise of profound risk. And, you know, to be totally fair, we also have to look at the Western man's side of the equation here.
Right, because he's not just passively watching this happen.
No, he is often navigating his own very silent anxieties. He's trying to shield himself from these toxic societal stereotypes that whisper his new partner is, merely executing a financial transaction.
Which is such a damaging stereotype. And if a couple leaves their marriage unanchored in these very real dynamics, it simply becomes a transactional pressure cooker.
Absolutely.
So the premise of the Sovereign Fortress is that if you apply data, pure logic, and sovereign legal boundaries, you can engineer a structure around the relationship that no stereotype and no systemic crisis can breach.
Okay, let's unpack this. I really want to look at the board exactly as it lies the moment she lands in the West. Let's do it. Because we need to move from that highly romanticized airplane ride directly into the harsh systemic brick walls she hits the second her feet touch the ground.
And the source material breaks this initial shock down into 3 distinct structural traps.
Right. Let's start with the first one, which they call the immigration dependency loop. Walk me through the actual mechanism of how this disempowers someone.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the mechanism is tied directly to the paperwork.
Okay, the paperwork.
Yeah. For the initial phase of relocation, which, by the way, can last for years, her legal right to physically exist in that new country is bound entirely to her husband's sponsorship signature.
Wow. So he is the ultimate guarantor.
He is the guarantor.
Right.
This creates a massive, immediate, involuntary power imbalance within the household.
Just structurally baked right in.
Exactly. And the stationary Western spouse rarely understands this organically because the immigration system is literally built to cater to his citizenship.
Right. He just glides right over the friction.
He does. But for her, her legal autonomy is now basically held hostage by her marital status.
That is terrifying when you actually put yourself in those shoes.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it from her perspective. If a marriage turns toxic, or even if just a subtle control dynamic begins to form,
Which happens a lot.
she is caught in this massive psychological paradox.
Yeah.
Does she endure an emotionally volatile environment just to secure her permanent residency? Or does she stand up for her boundaries and risk potential deportation and separation from her kids?
It's an impossible choice, really. And that precarious legal standing is immediately compounded by the second trap, which is the professional and intellectual reset.
Right, the career shock.
Yeah, because a significant percentage of women moving abroad are highly educated, autonomous individuals. But upon landing in the West, they are suddenly thrust into a reality where their local degrees, their professional certifications, and their years of accumulated tenure.
Boof.
Yes, completely unrecognized by local employers.
Which honestly blows my mind. I try to conceptualize this as taking like a Fortune 500 CEO, dropping them in a brand new city and telling them their only legal option to make money is to run a neighborhood lemonade stand.
That is a perfect analogy.
Or just sit on the couch, right? While they wait months or even years for work permits and expensive recertifications, their entire professional identity is put on ice.
It's brutal.
Going from an influential, self-determining woman to someone structurally prohibited from earning a living, I mean, how does a person even process that shock to their self-esteem?
It requires a total dismantling of the ego. You are essentially stripped of your professional utility, and structurally, because you cannot work, you fall straight into the third trap.
Financial disempowerment.
Exactly. Until she can establish local income streams, build a Western credit history completely from scratch, and open independent bank accounts, she relies entirely on his capital for basic survival.
Just imagine being a woman who has handled her own money her entire adult life, paid her own rent, funded her own goals.
Totally independent.
And suddenly you are in a position where you have to ask for a basic household allowance or justify buying a cup of coffee.
It's degrading.
The indignity of that is palpable. But the legal and financial shock is really only the beginning.
Because the cultural stuff comes next.
Right. Because even if you navigate the paperwork, the deeply emotional cultural fractures hit next. And this is where the source material gets into the stark contrast between the collectivist Filipino culture and the hyper-individualistic Western reality.
This is such a critical part of the book.
Yeah, let's talk about the daycare trap.
Okay, so this is where we see a profound clash of societal infrastructure. In the Philippines, a mother typically operates within a built-in village.
Right, lots of family around.
Exactly. She has grandmothers, aunts, trusted neighbors, and highly affordable domestic support. That collectivist village allows her to scale her personal and professional goals without crushing guilt or financial ruin.
But you land in the West and that village is just gone, evaporated.
Completely vanished.
If the couple has young children, they immediately hit a brutal economic wall.
Whoa.
We're talking about private daycare in the West, easily costing thousands of dollars a month.
Thousands. It's astronomical.
So she is forced into this heartbreaking dilemma. Does she pour her entire entry-level, uncredentialed Western salary directly into a daycare center just to break even?
Which feels completely pointless.
Or does she completely freeze her own growth to become an isolated stay-at-home parent, often in a really cold, unfamiliar climate?
Taking a breath and just imagining the weight of that choice, I mean, it's incredibly heavy.
It is. And it doesn't end there, because she also faces what the source calls the transnational remittance strain.
Correct. A Filipina does not emotionally or dutifully disconnect from her family simply because her geography changes.
Right.
Her moral obligation to assist her aging parents remains a very real active duty.
But the Western husband sees it differently.
Radically differently. He is typically raised with strict nuclear family boundaries. He is conditioned to view his income as belonging solely to his immediate household and his future retirement.
So he might view sending a portion of his paycheck abroad every month as this illogical drain on their savings.
Exactly. And when these two entirely different culturally ingrained expectations collide without a preemptive framework, it creates a silent, toxic friction.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
The woman feels she is abandoning her duty, and the man feels his financial boundaries are being completely disrespected.
So practically speaking, what does this actually do to the daily mood of the household? I mean, you've got the legal dependency, the loss of a career, the isolation of the daycare trap, and now you have these simmering arguments over sending money home.
It sounds like a recipe for deep underlying resentment.
Exactly.
And it is a recipe for profound isolation. And if you leave these structural vulnerabilities unaddressed, society is very quick to fill the silence with its ugliest labels.
Of the stereotypes.
Right. The outside world looks at the Western man and assumes he's an opportunist who intentionally sought out an isolated dependent.
And the world looks at the Filipina and leans into the lazy, toxic stereotype that she is an opportunistic modern hunter after a passport and a bank account.
Which is exactly the narrative the source material wants to dismantle.
And it argues that you kill that stereotype by deploying what it calls the ultimate weapon.
The cross-cultural prenuptial agreement.
Yes. Now, here is where I want to push back a little, because normally when we hear the word prenup, we think of a couple already anticipating a divorce. It feels, I don't know, combative.
It traditionally does. That's the typical Western framing. But The Sovereign Fortress completely rebrands the prenup.
Okay, how so?
The strategy is to permanently dismantle the narrative that she is marrying for a financial payout by taking asset division completely out of the emotional equation before the wedding even happens.
Wow, before the wedding.
Yes, you use aligned mirror agreements with independent legal counsel in both jurisdictions. So that's a marriage settlement under the family code in the Philippines and a standard prenuptial agreement in the West.
Okay, but let's look at the mechanics of what they're actually signing, because this is where it gets really interesting.
It really does.
The source recommends a regime of complete separation of property, meaning she legally, cleanly, and permanently signs away any default claim to his premarital wealth,
Right.
his corporate holdings, his inheritances, or his accumulated real estate.
Everything. She waives it all.
And I have to admit, when I first read that, I thought, wait, signing away all her rights immediately upon arrival.
Right.
How is that remotely protective of her?
Right.
That sounds like a terrible deal for someone taking on so much risk.
This raises an important question, Rayleigh. It sounds counterintuitive until you understand the leverage it creates.
Okay, explain the leverage.
By signing that waiver, the gold digger stereotype is dead on arrival. The legal text itself proves she has no access to his historical wealth. But, and this is the crucial pivot, a fair, modern, cross-cultural prenup cannot be one-sided. If she signs away her rights to his estate to protect him, he must legally bind himself to specific provisions that protect her from the structural vulnerabilities of relocation we just discussed.
Wow.
It is not an act of suspicion. The book argues it forces an act of supreme respect.
Okay, that makes so much sense. It's an exchange of specialized protections.
Exactly.
Which is brilliant, because every woman's sacrifice is different. You can't just download a generic template from the internet for this.
Definitely not.
It reminds me of a tactical heist movie. You know, you don't buy expensive flood insurance if you live in a desert, and you don't buy earthquake insurance if you live in a swamp.
Great analogy.
You have to tailor the armor to the specific specialist role she brings to the relationship. And the source breaks this down into a custom blueprint with 3 distinct profiles. Let's explore Profile A, the non-career homemaker.
Profile A represents a woman transitioning directly from her family home in the Philippines into a homemaking role in the West.
So she doesn't have a huge resume to fall back on.
Right. She doesn't have an established corporate career back home to fall back on. Her vulnerability to complete financial dependency is extremely high.
So how does the prenup practically protect her? Because it outlines 3 specific mechanisms. First, a relocation and transition allowance.
Yes, and this isn't an allowance he hands out weekly like an allowance for a teenager.
Right.
It is an independent, non-refundable lump sum transition fund placed in a bank account solely in her name the exact moment she arrives.
Which is huge for her autonomy.
It guarantees she has a structural buffer for basic needs right out of the gate.
And second, there's a skill acquisition and integration fund.
Yeah, the husband contractually agrees to fully fund local integration costs. So that's driving lessons, vocational training, language courses if needed, all within the first 12 to 24 months.
I love that, because even if she hasn't built a past career, she deserves the infrastructure to build a future one.
Exactly.
And the third mechanism for Profile A is a proportional alimony vesting schedule. Explain how that works in practice, because a standard waiver of spousal support would be disastrous for her.
So think of a vesting schedule like earning equity in a startup.
Okay, yeah.
For every year the marriage lasts, a guaranteed monthly spousal support amount is locked in for a set duration if a divorce occurs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so if they separate after 1 year, maybe she gets 6 months of support. If they separate after 10 years, she is vested for a much longer period.
It mathematically ensures she isn't left destitute in a foreign country without a safety net, but it's tied to the actual duration of the partnership.
Exactly. It's fair for both.
Okay, that makes practical sense. But let's look at Profile B, the dedicated career professional. This is a very different risk profile.
Very different.
We're talking about a woman sacrificing real tenure. You know, a high-ranking public school educator, maybe a corporate manager. She is taking a giant step backward to zero. A simple lump sum transition fund doesn't replace a pension.
Right. Her blueprint must focus on professional indemnification.
Okay, how does that work?
The prenup includes a career indemnification clause. It explicitly recognizes her career gap in the legal text.
Wow, legally recognizing the gap.
Yes. It legally obligates the husband to fully fund her complete recertification, her bridging programs, or any advanced degrees required to regain her equivalent professional rank in the new country.
And crucially, there's the pension and tenure replacement allotment. because she left her local retirement systems behind, right?
Right. So he agrees to make a fixed annual contribution into an independent retirement account, like an IRA, exclusively in her name.
It's not just a vague promise to take care of her down the line. It is a legally mandated transfer of funds into her sovereign control.
Exactly. Plus, she gets a non-standard alimony safety net.
Okay, what's that?
If a separation happens during those highly vulnerable gap years before she's back on her feet professionally, he has to either fund her living expenses or provide a comprehensive relocation fund to repatriate her back home with full dignity.
It literally covers the professional opportunity cost.
Yeah.
That is so thorough.
It is. Now, consider Profile C, the hybrid.
Oh, right.
This is the woman who has a formal career, but also runs her own active online business or digital enterprise.
So she is used to absolute financial sovereignty and cash flow. Right, so her risk isn't necessarily starting from zero. Her risk is the disruption of her business velocity due to the friction of moving internationally.
You nailed it. Her armor focuses on intellectual property shielding.
So first is absolute retention of corporate and digital assets. Her online business and all its revenues remain her 100% separate property. He waives all claims to it.
But she also requires a mixed income tax and infrastructure shield.
Because relocating a business across international borders is a total nightmare of tax compliance and legal restructuring.
It really is. So practically, the husband funds the professional, legal, and accounting assistance required to register her business properly in the new country.
Oh, I see. He absorbs the overhead of the transition so she doesn't lose her momentum.
Exactly. And finally, she gets a domestic allocation and opportunity cost fund.
Right. A fixed portion of the joint household fund pays for professional cleaning or childcare. And why? So her business velocity isn't completely crushed by suddenly having to manage an unassisted domestic life in a country where she has zero village.
It is a highly engineered, comprehensive system.
It really is. But we need to escalate this to the highest risk scenario.
The escape hatch.
Yes, the stay-at-home escape hatch clause. We've talked about transition phases and maintaining careers, but what if the dynamic requires her to step off the professional ladder entirely?
What if they agree she will stay at home full-time to manage the household and raise the children?
This is where the risk matrix hits its absolute peak. Think about the timeline here. If a divorce hits at the, say, 3 to 5 year mark, it leaves the woman with a multi-year resume gap, zero local income, and because she signed that prenup with complete separation of property.
Your asset division.
Exactly. Zero asset division. She is in extreme peril. So the blueprint deploys 3 extreme provisions to prevent total exploitation.
The first is the Missed Salary Restoration Fund, which the source also calls the Repatriation Safe Haven.
Okay.
If the marriage dissolves early, the husband is required to pay an immediate, non-negotiable lump sum, and the calculation is precise.
How do they calculate it?
You take the equivalent annual salary she would have earned back home, multiply it by the years she stayed out of the workforce, and factor it for inflation.
Wow. It operates as a literal life restoration fund.
It does.
Okay, but the second provision, I really need to slow down here because reading this completely stopped me in my tracks.
Biological risk?
Yes, the pregnancy biological risk compensation. Let's really look at the mechanics of this. The prenup legally states that if she undergoes pregnancy and childbirth, she is entitled to an independent maternal risk compensation payout in the event of a divorce.
It is groundbreaking.
I mean, contractually valuing a woman's bodily risk. Acknowledging that while his assets remained entirely protected by the law, she took on 100% of the biological risk to bring his legacy into the world.
It is a radical reframing of what constitutes a marital sacrifice.
That is just... well, I know it sounds wildly controversial to put a price tag on that, but the underlying logic is absolutely staggering to me.
It totally is. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, carrying a child is a profound medical event. It carries long-term physical, hormonal, and professional consequences.
Right. It's not just a hobby.
It is not merely a lifestyle choice. The logic here dictates that if he demands 100% protection of his corporate value and his real estate, she must demand 100% protection of her time, her bodily integrity, and her missed opportunity costs.
Since his assets are perfectly shielded, her bodily sacrifice has to be financially shielded. It's undeniably logical.
Totally.
And that leads to the third provision in the escape hatch, which is unpaid labor and child care valuation equity.
Yeah, this one is crucial.
The prenup assigns a clear contractual economic value to her domestic labor. If a divorce triggers, Her hours of uncompensated service are calculated as a tangible financial contribution and paid out as an equity settlement.
It legally offsets his protected assets by paying her for the structural overhead she saved him by keeping his life running for free.
Precisely. You are monetizing the invisible labor.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on this airtight, highly customized legal document.
Right.
But, let's be real for a second.
Right.
A legal document sitting in a drawer at a lawyer's office won't stop a Tuesday night argument about how much is being spent on groceries.
Definitely not.
How do we take these high-level indemnification concepts and turn them into daily operational peace in the house?
Well, the document is only the foundation. You have to actively implement what the source calls a shared architecture for daily peace.
Okay, what does that look like?
The first mechanism of that daily system is 3-bucket banking. You establish his account for his private discretionary funds, her account for her private discretionary funds and separate business revenues, and the household joint pool.
And the joint pool is funded proportionally based on their respective incomes, right?
Yeah.
Used strictly for shared living expenses like the mortgage and utilities.
Exactly. You keep the household running from the joint pool. And the second part of this architecture is what absolutely secures the peace.
The sovereign income rule? Right, let's tie this back to the transnational remittance string we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Instead of letting remittances back to her parents become this hidden emotional flashpoint where he feels drained and she feels guilty, the system solves it structurally.
Right.
Her routine financial support to her parents back home comes strictly from her separate income bucket. Because her husband has no legal claim to her business revenue or her allowance under the prenup, he has absolutely zero say in how she deploys her profit.
It removes the emotional friction entirely. It's a mechanism of boundary enforcement.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to stress about his retirement savings being depleted by overseas transfers, and she doesn't need to ask permission to fulfill her cultural obligations.
It is an absolute win-win.
Yeah.
I mean, it completely preserves his peace of mind regarding his hard-earned capital, and it preserves her absolute pride, dignity, and cultural duty to her family. Nobody feels used. Nobody feels controlled.
It's beautifully engineered.
So as we wrap this up, what does all this complex legal and financial architecture mean for you, the listener?
Right. What's the big takeaway?
If we take a step back from the specific clauses and vesting schedules, the core message is that true protection in a marriage isn't about building walls to keep each other out.
No.
It's about engineering a fortress together that keeps toxic systemic traps and ugly societal stereotypes out. By taking money hostage situations completely off the table, the only thing left standing is the actual truth of the relationship.
Exactly. It forces couples to confront the uncomfortable realities of money, immigration, and asset protection head-on, sitting down as absolute equals before the stakes get too high.
It is incredibly powerful. But, I want to leave you with a final thought today, something to really chew on that wasn't even the main focus of our source material, but feels impossible to ignore now.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
If assigning a contractual economic value to unpaid domestic labor and legally compensating biological pregnancy risk is the ultimate, most logical way to protect women in cross-cultural relocations, where power dynamics are severely skewed. Shouldn't every modern marriage, even those between people from the exact same hometown, be adopting these exact same clauses?
It's a huge question.
Right. If it makes sense to financially protect a woman crossing an ocean to build a family, doesn't it make equal sense to protect a woman crossing the street to move in with her partner?
It really makes you think.
Think about it. Because at the end of the day, whether you are moving across town or rebuilding your life's architecture on a foreign high-gravity planet, the structural risks of stepping away from your career and putting your body on the line are exactly the same.
The risks don't change just because the geography is familiar.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring these power dynamics, keep challenging the defaults, and we will catch you on the next one.